America cannot build its own missiles, not because of budget, not because of politics. China controls the one material that makes them possible, and they have shut it off. You clicked the right video. What I am about to walk you through is not a news segment. It is not partisan commentary. It is a forensic case study in what happens when a nation dismantles its structural pillars, one by one, across decades, until the day it actually needs them. Every pillar failure leaves evidence. This one leaves a mountain of it. Analysts have spent months trying to calculate what the wars in Ukraine and the Persian Gulf have actually cost, not in lives and not in dollars, but in something harder to replace: munitions. The missiles, interceptors, and defense systems that take years to build and hundreds of millions of dollars per unit. And when you add up what has been expended across 2 active theaters, the numbers are alarming. The Tomahawk cruise missile, $2.6 million per unit. Before the recent conflict in the Persian Gulf, the estimated U.S. inventory stood at around 3,100. Over 1,000 have been expended. Under 200 arrived this year. Normal production time is 4 years, and these are not normal times. The SM-3 missile, roughly half the stockpile used. Those take over 5 years to rebuild from scratch. The Patriot system, $3.9 million per missile, 42 months to manufacture a replacement. Stockpile cut in half. Ukraine alone has burned through 600 of them. Switzerland ordered Patriot batteries in 2022. Expected delivery this year. Now they are told 2031. Maybe. They are reviewing whether to cancel the order entirely. And then there is THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. 8 batteries exist in total U.S. inventory. One of those was rushed from South Korea to the Middle East to replace what was destroyed or expended in the Persian Gulf theater. Over 150 THAAD missiles used. Only 200 remain globally. Not one new missile arrives before 2029. 53 months to build a replacement. The clock started after the war began. During the conflict, the United States expended far more interceptors defending Israel than Israeli forces did. The U.S. launched over 200 THAAD missiles and roughly 100 SM-3s and SM-6s in Israel's defense. Israel deployed fewer than 100 Arrow interceptors and around 90 David's Sling missiles. The United States took on more than half the missile defense mission for a country whose prime minister pushed for the war in the first place. Pentagon spokesman called it equitable burden sharing. Analysts called it something else. When the Secretary of Defense went before the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Mark Kelly asked how much it will cost to rebuild these stockpiles. The first answer, $31 billion. 10 seconds later, correcting himself, the Secretary said $53 billion. After another minute, the number became $330 billion, a gap of $300 billion in under 2 minutes. The department responsible did not have a coherent accounting of its own whole, and no matter how much money they spend, those missiles cannot get built without China, and China will not let them. Here is the thing. The missiles, eventually, you could replace them. It would take years, but it is theoretically possible. What you cannot replace on any reasonable timeline is the one material that goes inside all of them. And that material has a very specific name. Samarium. It is a rare earth element. Specifically, samarium cobalt magnets sit inside the guidance and propulsion systems of every advanced missile the United States fields. Lockheed Martin needs 50 pounds of samarium to build a single F-35 fighter jet. China produces 100% of global supply. Samarium cobalt magnets do one thing: advanced weapons systems. China's export controls are specifically written to exclude dual-use exemptions for samarium. There is no gray area. There is no workaround. An industry supplier to Raytheon put it plainly: China has successfully closed every loophole that existed before. The United States tried to fix this. 2 companies received significant government funding to build domestic samarium production capacity. The first, MP Materials received tens of millions but never unpacked their equipment. They backed out. The second, an Australian company called Linus, received $351 million to build in Texas. They chose Malaysia instead. At present, the United States produces zero samarium domestically, so contractors urgently needed samarium from any address that was not Beijing. A CEO found approximately 200 tons of samarium sitting in a warehouse in France, material from 5 decades ago. Industry insiders confirmed that would supply the U.S. defense industry for roughly 1 year. That is the current plan, a warehouse in France. 50-year-old material. You genuinely cannot make this up. It is not just samarium. The Tomahawk alone contains 18 critical minerals beyond samarium and neodymium. Tungsten for control surfaces, gallium for semiconductors, cobalt for superalloys. China controls the mining and processing for nearly all of them. Contractors are not permitted to buy from Chinese sources, while having no alternative source to turn to. The Trump administration responded by creating Project Vault, a $12 billion strategic mineral reserve. It is ironic because the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is currently being drained due to energy disruptions. Building a strategic mineral reserve is the right instinct, but reserves are what you draw down when production fails. They are not a substitute for production. Now I want to step back and put a framework around all of this, because this crisis was predictable. The 7 Pillars framework identifies the structural conditions that make this kind of failure possible. 4 of those pillars are visibly eroded in what we have just described. Here is what each one tells us. The 5th pillar is domestic manufacturing. Its core argument: production determines independence, not financial instruments or stock prices. Production. Alexander Hamilton's 1791 report on manufactures argued that a nation unable to produce its own essential goods would find its independence constrained by those who could. When you offshore production, you move the knowledge that makes production possible. And when you try to bring it back, you discover that the knowledge did not wait for you. The 1st pillar is independence. It is self-direction in the public interest. A nation can possess free elections and a constitution, yet still find its most critical decisions constrained by whoever controls what it needs to function. Rights declared without productive strength are fragile. When your defense systems depend entirely on inputs controlled by an adversary, that adversary holds effective veto power over your military decisions through the supply chain. Political sovereignty without material independence is just a performance. The 6th pillar is internal improvements, infrastructure. It is whatever connects productive capacity into a coherent national whole. Supply chains are national infrastructure. We allowed our entire missile pipeline, from extraction to assembly, to be constructed on foreign soil. That is the equivalent of building your national power grid on land you do not own and being surprised when the landlord changes the terms. The connective tissue of our production has been severed at every stage. The 7th pillar is discoveries and inventions. A sovereign nation must invest in the capacity to discover new solutions. Real innovation requires long-term capital and actual industrial knowledge. What happened with Samarium was a failure to invest in real discovery. Funding was directed toward the appearance of innovation, unproven technologies, and inexperienced companies, rather than the substance of a solution. Real discovery requires institutional patience that budget cycles rarely permit. So here is where we stand. 4 pillars examined. 4 pillars visibly eroded. Not because of any single decision, but because pillars neglected long enough hollow out quietly until the day you need them. At the start I said, America cannot build its own missiles. Now you have the structural answer. Pillar 5 eroded via offshoring. Pillar 1 was replaced by dependency. Pillar 6 was handed to an adversary. Pillar 7 was funded on paper. Each erosion compounded the others. Structural failures follow a predictable pattern. Pillars are treated as permanent when they require maintenance. By the time the hollowing is visible, The cost of repair is orders of magnitude higher than prevention. The framework is not political, it is architectural. Remove one pillar and the roof begins to sag. Remove several and the entire structure collapses. If you want to understand this framework in full and how to diagnose which ones are eroding in your own country, the framework guide is where to start. It is free at 7pillars.com. I am Rafiq Al-Shahbaz, Libertatem Reserare.